were in Dallas and who were also in Washington later and saw the body the second time. And it was obvious to them, Siebert and O'Neill, that something had been altered.
Can you, I wonder if you would tell me, though, in terms of your analysis in what's gone on between then and now and the changing of the guard and the government, because, I know that you're aware that we have more than, a secret government, and we've got, the staged situation.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if you look at that situation from the time of the assassination, which really, to me, I always think of it as when there was, in essence, a coup d'etat, and a different faction took over the government and basically have been in power ever since. But they themselves are somewhat, I believe, fragmented, and that they are also fighting among themselves.
Yeah.
So
you use the word exactly as fragmented. They are fragmented because we're not dealing with the original. We're not dealing with the original conspirators and murderers. We're really dealing with their grandchildren. This bag of worms, can of worms, was handed off from one group to another as the generation passed, and there is dissension. As I said, the resources aren't there anymore. They just cannot, the lid cannot be kept on the big lie, because I like to say often the truth is seamless. It's a perfectly woven fabric. And if you take one thread of the truth and start to pull on it and tug it, it'll lead you along that thread to the crosshatch and the warp and the woof. But wherever there's been some kind of deception, they have to patch it up, and that patch stands out in the fabric of truth, you see? And the cost of keeping the cover-up has grown so great it's just impossible. Now, I don't think that there has been a change of guard. I think that they have had a method for supplying the puppets, the yes men that they need to have to maintain the lid on the cover-up. And that what we have seen, the hijacking of the United States Treasury in the last year, is the culmination of the process that began there. Because the Federal Reserve had a big stake in the killing of President Kennedy. He was at war with them. He had already ordered the United States government to print out its own silver certificates. He was going on the silver. Instead of a gold standard, President Kennedy was going to go on the silver standard, and he issued $4.2 billion in silver certificate notes in June of 1963. And he had given the Fed notice that next election they were going to be replaced. And, of course, what's Ron Paul saying now? Audit the Fed. Well, President Kennedy had those ideas then. And the financiers, the industrialists, the oil people, they were against President Kennedy because he was going to get rid of the oil depletion allowance. He was a real American revolutionary. President Kennedy believed in the Constitution and constitutional law, and he was going to re-engineer the framework of our nation. So first it was him, then it was his brother, then Martin Luther King, then Allard Lowenthal, and we have lived in the age of assassination. If you go to UFO Digest, beside my work on UFOs, there's an article there called "The Operation of in History." The Black Hand was a symbol of the mafia, and I wrote up an article citing about 42 assassinations through history, because I object to the fact that conspiracy has become a dirty word. And a conspiracy theorist, is a label that they throw on people to discredit them. But what I did in this article was I rehabilitated the word. I pointed out that the word conspiracy has been in Webster's dictionary for almost 200 years, that it's been in history for thousands of years, and that in fact history began with an assassination called the assassination of Osiris. And this leads us right back to Dealey Plaza, because the murder of President Kennedy was dressed up as a religious pageant in which President Kennedy was Osiris, slain by his evil twin brother Seth, according to the myth of the legend of Osiris. His twin brother killed him. So we have President Kennedy Osiris in the coffin, meaning the limousine, and brother Seth, J.D. Tippett, shooting him from the grassy knoll. At a time when there was a conjunction of Mars and Venus in the constellation Scorpio, with the most evil star, Aldebaran, the fallen angel, shining right over Dealey Plaza, even though it was daytime. That's where it was, in Scorpio. And according to Egyptian history, Osiris was killed at the time when Mars was in Scorpio. And here you had a conjunction of Mars and Venus in Scorpio on the day President Kennedy was assassinated.
So it sounds like you're very well versed as well in occult symbolism, and you're probably very much aware also of the symbolism that NASA uses, that Hoagland has touched on.
Yeah.
I would be surprised if you know this as well, and this actually gives you a leg up on predicting events in the future of our country and possibly the world. And I would like it if you would go in that direction, and also I want you to wrap in Dulcie and Paperclip, if you would,
okay.
because this is some areas that do fall under this huge topic.
Yes. Well, first of all, Richard Hoagland and I are great friends. I would say we're brothers. We met in 1993 through my cousin, who had been in contact with Richard, and Richard was living in Hoboken, New Jersey, right across the river from where I live in Manhattan. So we met, and basically Richard had half the coin and I had the other half. And we sat and we brainstormed and we talked for 4 or 5 hours, and it was incredible, because here he had been studying the NASA angle, and I had been coming from the JFK, exclusively the JFK assassination, and we sit down, we start talking, and all of this information started to gel. And he had the numerology and the symbolism of the numbers. Oh, the numbers. Let me just explain to you on this topic. November 22nd, 1963. An incredibly significant day. Why? Because 656 years to the date was the date that the Templars had been betrayed by the King of France, and the papacy. They had been condemned to death, and November 22nd, 1307, was the day that Jacques de Molay and the Templars were burned at the stake, and he pronounced revenge would come upon them, upon the crown. Now, 656 is just a little shy of that really evil number, the 666. But when you look at the numerology of 11/22/1963, you add them up, they add up to 10. So that 10 supplies the missing decade to make that date equal to 666. And
oh wow, fascinating.
Yeah, it's really arcane. Another thing. This event was also followed. 1307 was a year of peasants' revolt, and the peasants' revolt in England sought to displace the king and to establish this ideal society, which was called ... the Great Society. So in comes Lyndon Johnson after Kennedy's eliminated and put him in the White House, and what's he going to set up? The Great Society. And the significance of this is this was dealing with Wat Tyler's revolt, and Wat Tyler's troops rampaged through the countryside, terrorizing the country, but they had a really special uniform. They wore white robes with white pointed woolen hats.